So what you have by the fall of 1919 was a situation where there was actually growing isolationist sentiment in America, which the American people started losing support for international obligations overseas. And then you had the Armenian question being bogged down within internal American party politics. And all of this was dooming aid to Armenia. And let's just fast forward a little bit to April of 1920. At that particular point, the Allies who were meeting in San Remo in Italy formally asked Woodrow Wilson to accept a mandate for Armenia and to delineate the border between Armenia and Turkey to include the 4 Turkish Armenian provinces. Now Wilson accepted this invitation in May, but of course it required Senate approval. Meanwhile, Harding substituted his own resolution for the Williams resolution. And this resolution by Harding only congratulated the Armenian Republic on its independence, and it expressed hope that it would realize its national aspirations, but it said nothing about U.S. troops or assistance to Armenia. It only authorized a U.S. ship to evacuate American relief workers from the port of Batum in Georgia. Now the Harding resolution passed the Senate unanimously that same month, but it really amounted to nothing. And James Gerard, the executive director of the ACIA, who was very close to Vahan Kardashian, expressed his deep disappointment to Lodge, who replied, quote, "It was only with some difficulty that we got as much as we did." Wilson then sent the mandate up to the Senate, and Gerard and Kardashian believed actually this was very foolhardy at the time, because the last thing they wanted was a negative vote. They realized that the Kemalist Turks who were consolidating power in Anatolia would see a negative vote against the U.S. mandate as something that would encourage them to actually attack Armenia. And so then Gerard and Wilson prevailed on the Wilson administration not to do it, but the Wilson administration went ahead and did it. Now, why Woodrow Wilson went ahead with this, one never knows, because the political tea leaves, as they say in Washington, were such that it was going to go down to defeat. But I think, maybe Wilson felt he had an obligation both to the European allies that he would do it, but also I think he felt it would maybe cleanse him of his own sort of guilt by not moving on the Armenian issue sooner. So he felt he had to go through with the process of sending a mandate up to the Senate. He may have also banked on the fact that there was a lot of pro-Armenian sentiment still in the United States, despite growing isolationism, and he felt maybe, who knows, but maybe that the senators would have a different view. But Henry Cabot Lodge, I think, who comes across as a very cynical figure in all of this process, actually did not take part in the debate on the mandate, but was the floor manager. Floor manager in the Senate means somebody who actually directs other members to participate in debate. And he definitely wanted to kill the mandate idea. And when the vote was taken, there were actually 2 votes. There was a negative vote that he proposed Lodge, and then there was a positive vote. And the positive vote for a mandate, only 12 senators voted in favor of it. And some members of the Senate actually cited the large financial costs. They mistakenly used actually the numbers for a mandate for the whole of Anatolia, not just for Armenia. But the Chicago Tribune in April of that year said, quote, "It is Armenia's crowning misfortune, with a mandate going begging, that it has no oil wells. What a difference oil makes in the white man's burden." And the comment here is that the British and the French were seeking to carve up the Middle East for their own economic interests. But nobody wanted Armenia because it didn't have oil, didn't have rich natural resources. So the Europeans were trying to lob off the Armenian mandate to the United States and found a receptive audience in Wilson. But by the time all of this took place, it was much too late. Now in the fall of 1920, the Kemalist Turks attacked the Armenian Republic while the Bolsheviks were occupying the Caucasus. And then on December 2nd, the Armenian Republic opted for Sovietization to save the rest of the republic from falling to the Turks. So the whole enterprise then, you could say, lasted about 1.5 years or to almost 2 years, the ACIA, but then with the fall of the Armenian Republic, things seem to have come to an end. But Vahan Kardashian was a very committed figure, and he refused to give up the fight. In his philosophy, he believed that one day both the Kemalist Turkish regime and the Bolshevik regime would fall. So it would be very important to preserve Armenia's rights, at least on the diplomatic front, at least on paper. So to his credit, he never gave up. Now, the lobby got sort of a jolt of inspiration during the whole debate of the so-called Lausanne Treaty. And let me explain this a little bit. As some of you know, the Sèvres Treaty was the one that actually gave the paper award to Armenia, but that was with the Ottoman government. And then, of course, Kemalist Turkey was on the rise and basically wanted a new treaty with the Allies. So the Allies negotiated a Treaty of Lausanne, which was finally came into being in 1923. Now, the Americans were not at war with Turkey, so they only had observers at Lausanne. But the Turks had an inclination that they said they wanted then to negotiate a separate treaty between the United States and Turkey. Now, this treaty was called officially the Treaty of Amity and Commerce between the United States and Turkey. It was negotiated shortly after the official Lausanne Treaty. But in the American political context, it was all sort of lumped together, and within the American political context, that particular treaty with the U.S. was simply called the Lausanne Treaty. But here, I think Kardashian learned the game of hardball politics from his earlier years with the lobby. For the United States to actually approve a treaty by the Constitution, you need 2/3 majority in the Senate. So therefore, if there were something like 48 states of the Union at the time, you needed something in order of 65 or so, or 64, some mathematician can do the math here, to actually approve the treaty. So you could actually defeat the treaty by not having the Senate get that many votes. So Kardashian then put all of the resources of the lobby group into defeating this particular treaty. There was also a charge that the United States negotiators at Lausanne actually bartered away Armenia's rights for an oil concession. And this gets a little complicated, but let me sort of lay this out to you. The actual treaty, the American Treaty of Lausanne, was signed on August 6, 1923. 4 days later, the Turkish government, the Turkish parliament, approved what's called the Chester Concession. And this was a huge venture by an American company led by a former Navy admiral, Chester, to actually build a railroad line through what is now considered historic Armenia. And within that concession, that company would then have exclusive rights to mineral deposits on 25 kilometers of each side of that proposed railroad. In fact, Turkish historians, not just Armenian historians, have actually said that Turkey approved this oil concession, or this concession, a railroad/oil concession, because they wanted a more pliant United States negotiating team. So obviously there was some sort of bargaining behind the scenes, considering the fact that this vote on the concession was shortly after the American Treaty was concluded. Now, Kardashian cleverly used this for partisan political purposes. In fact, at the Democratic National Convention in 1924, he actually worked with some leading Democrats to get a plank approved in the committee platform. Here, let me just sort of read you that.